All right, so I saw this story while I was on Twitter today, and I really honestly I was taken aback at the fact that this is a real thing. I don't know if you've seen it, but the Mavericks could potentially be in a position to where they'll be forced to forfeit games due to injury. So obviously there are a ton of injuries going on right now with this team. Anthony Davis strained his adductor. Kyrie tore his MCL. Daniel Gafford sprained his MCL. Max Prosper tore a ligament in his wrist. Dante Exum broke a bone in his hand. Jaden Hardy, PJ Washington, and Caleb Martin have also run into injuries. They have just been riddled by injuries and hurt players and all sorts of things. You can't help but think about the trade that happened, and you can't help but point fingers at Nico Harrison and the Mavericks front office for allowing this to happen. Now, I will say the Luka trade isn't why Kyrie hurt his MCL. The Luka trade isn't why Max Prosper and some of these other guys have been out due to injuries. It's a possibility that those things would have happened anyway. So the Luka trade is not the central reason behind these injuries. Those things happened on their own. You can't control it. But you would think that if Luka was still here on this roster, there would be somewhat of a chance that they are still a competent team and they could still etch out some wins here and there. That's the disappointment, right? Nobody's saying that these injuries happen because Luka is out and he's gone, he was traded. That would be ridiculous to say. But the issue is, if Luka were here and if he was never traded away in the first place, the Mavericks would have a chance at still being competent to some degree. So that's the issue with Luka getting traded and how it relates to these injury issues that Dallas has run into. And so, as I said, there is a chance that they could end up forfeiting games as the season progresses on. The biggest reason behind that is they just will probably not have enough available guys in certain situations. You need to have at least 8 players to be eligible to play in a game. And right now the roster is just dwindling down. They're even low on two-way contract guys. Kessler Edwards only has, I think, 3 or 2 more games left that he's eligible for. There's a guy named Brandon Williams on the roster who has 6 games left as far as his eligibility as a two-way guy. So it's a really ugly situation right now for the Dallas Mavericks. They also don't have space to sign an additional player. So as I said, all of this stuff adds up, and the league does require you to have at least 8 players to be active for every game, or else you'd have to forfeit. And that just seems like an ugly reality right now for the Dallas Mavericks. And what I think about immediately is just how much of a fall off this has been relative to last season. Last season, they were literally at the top of the Western Conference. As a fan of basketball, I was so happy to see Kyrie and Luka prove people wrong. There were so many naysayers, so many people that didn't think that duo had potential to actually win. They ended up going to the finals, and it wasn't the best finals performance for them. I think they lost in like 5 games, but still, it showed that it could work. And I was like, this is like the next best 1-2 punch. This has the potential to be the greatest backcourt of all time. That was already a conversation last season. It seemed premature, but when you have 2 guys like that playing at that high of a level, you would think that at some point down the road, if they're able to stay intact with one another, they could get to that level. And now here we are, right? They're going to be out of the playoffs. The Luka Kyrie duo is a thing of the past. We only got like 1.5 seasons of it. Just really, really ugly, a hideous fall off. I would argue one of the biggest team fall offs in NBA history. Arguably the biggest. And I said arguably, right? There have been some other massive fall offs, and that's what I'm going to talk about a bit here. Let's put this one into context. What were some of the other major fall offs from a team being a championship contender to being into a position to where they are one of the more looked down upon squads in all of basketball? Because right now with the Mavericks, they're looked down upon, right? Like the fact that we're talking about them potentially having to forfeit games, it is a complete 180 from where we were last season. It would be different if they were like underwhelmed and they were just like a playing tournament team. You would still be disappointed, but this is another level of bad. So again, let's put this into context. Let's bring some other examples in. What were some other massive team fall offs from one year into the other throughout the course of NBA history? You cannot have this conversation without mentioning the 1998 '99 Chicago Bulls. We all know how things went. In '98, they were at the top of the world. They won their 6th NBA championship of the '90s. It was Jordan's 6th title, one of the more iconic. We all remember the shot that he hit. They're at the top of the world, right? They're arguably the greatest basketball team of all time. They had multiple teams within that decade that could be included in that situation. And then all of a sudden, front office decides to break everything apart. Rodman's gone, Pippen's gone, Jordan's in retirement, and the Bulls go from being the NBA champion to the literal worst team in basketball. They went from 62 wins and an NBA title, one of the most iconic NBA titles ever, to just 13 wins and the flat out worst record in the NBA. You literally go from being a dynasty and one of the most iconic teams in sports history to being the worst team in basketball. Unbelievable fall off. Now, you would expect this type of fall off if you're losing the greatest duo of all time, or arguably the greatest duo of all time with Pippen and Jordan, and you lose the greatest rebounder, arguably the greatest rebounder and one of the best defenders ever in Rodman. You expect that sort of fall off, so it isn't like the Bulls just came back and didn't play well despite having a bunch of talent. If you lose a guy like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, 2 first ballot Hall of Famers, you're going to expect there to be a fall off, right? But this fall off was so drastic, and it also didn't have to happen as well. So there's the relation to this and the Mavericks situation, where you had this fall off that didn't need to happen, but the front office decided to make these questionable choices, and there the Bulls were, going from being at the top of the world to being the worst team in the entire league. Let's go to the 2020 season and let's talk about the Golden State Warriors. I don't know if you remember this one. This was a really weird year for a ton of reasons. Obviously, Golden State had made the finals in 2019. They lost. There was a lot left to the imagination of fans of what would have happened in that 2019 series. KD was hurt. Klay Thompson went out. So, I still wonder what would have happened if Golden State stayed healthy through that series against Toronto. And I'm taking nothing away from Toronto. They were amazing, and Kawhi was playing at a completely different level. But who knows, right? That could have been, the 4th championship or the 3rd championship of the Kevin Durant era, right? So I think that was one of the biggest what if NBA Finals series of all time. But obviously, that following summer, things just weren't the same between Kevin Durant and the team in the front office, and there was a massive sign and trade. They dealt KD away to Brooklyn, and in exchange, they got D'Angelo Russell, and it was just a really, really weird season. They got off to an ugly start. Steph Curry injured himself and was out for pretty much the rest of the season. Klay Thompson injured himself as well, and they finished 15-50 before COVID shut down the NBA. One of the weirdest seasons ever, and again, just a really bad fall off from being a championship contending group to being a team that just couldn't find any luck as far as wins and everything go. What made it even weirder was they traded D'Angelo Russell and got Andrew Wiggins. Now, the Andrew Wiggins pickup did ultimately set them up for success down the road, as he was a vital piece to that 2022 championship winning roster. But again, just a really, really weird season and a massive disruption in the Golden State Warriors dynasty. And then we can have this conversation about the Cavaliers after LeBron James left them to join Miami back in the 2010-2011 season. So in 2010, the Cavaliers were the #1 team in the Eastern Conference. They lost in the conference semifinals to a really, really good Boston Celtics team. And then LeBron left. LeBron goes to Miami. We all know the story. We all know what happened there. And the Cavaliers make this massive 180 between being the best team out east to ultimately being at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. And it started a few years process of them kind of being a laughing stock of the league. I'm not going to say they're a complete laughing stock, because they were watchable because of a guy named Kyrie Irving, who they drafted in 2011 shortly after. He made that team watchable enough, and they did ultimately re-up, get LeBron back, and we all know what happened after that. Set up one of the greatest rivalries in NBA history, and they won, in my opinion, the best NBA championship of all time in 2016. So they recovered, but obviously when LeBron left that Cavs team in the 2010 offseason, that set them up for failure for a few seasons, but they did ultimately bounce back once they got him back. Then you can also kind of talk about when he left after 2018. But one thing I've loved about the Cavaliers is both times LeBron left, they didn't stay at the bottom of the league for an extensive period, right? It wasn't like a decade of them being a really, really bad team. They ultimately built things back up piece by piece and got back to being competent, right? So we're talking about when LeBron left in 2018, just maybe 2 or 3 seasons after that, they were back to being a watchable, competent enough squad, right? So that's one thing I'll say about Cleveland is every time LeBron has left, yes, there have been periods where they struggled, but they have been able to recover solidly enough as the years go by. So they've done a good job at not allowing themselves to be a franchise that stays underwater for way too long, kind of like the Charlotte Hornets or some other franchises that we've seen. So those are some other notable team fall-offs where one year they're contenders and the next year they're at the bottom. I think the biggest would just simply have to be the 1998 Chicago Bulls, because again, you go from being a dynasty to being nothing at all, and it was completely avoidable. But I would say the Dallas Mavericks situation is nearly, not exactly, but nearly on par, because again, you have the situation where the front office breaks up something that was clearly working, right? Like the reason the Mavericks were not competent to get the season started was because of injuries. It wasn't because of a lack of fit. It wasn't because of basketball reasons, no matter how much they try to say that was the reason behind it. They broke up something that was clearly working, that clearly made sense. Even if they wouldn't have gotten to the postseason or made a deep postseason run this year, even when they kept Luka, or if they kept Luka, there was still a world where they would see success sometime down the road. Things happen, right? You can make a championship level run one year, have kind of a one season hiatus where you're on the downfall just a bit and recover. We've seen that happen before. So no matter what way you cut it, Dallas gave up on something way too early for whatever reason they're trying to make it. They're going to regret it. They're going to regret it, especially when you look at how things are looking for them right now and their future. And look, like even if they forfeit games, there is a little bit of a bright spot here. This could put them in solid position from a draft standpoint, but still, again, you left the Luka dynasty for pretty much no reason. So those are my thoughts right on this ugly situation here in Dallas. I don't like it. I don't like that this team is where they're at. Again, I can't blame everything on the Luka trade, because again, Luka being traded away doesn't make Kyrie get hurt, doesn't make some of these other guys get hurt. But as I said, you can't help but think, would they still be competent enough if Luka was here on this roster, even if those injuries would have happened anyway?